for a session produced by our underwriter, Bristol-Myers Squibb. Please welcome its Chief Medical Officer of Global Drug Development, Dr. Samit Hirawat, and Linda House, President of the Cancer Support Community. Here to lead the conversation is Justin Birckbichler, Educator and Founder of aballsysenseoftumor.com.
Welcome, everybody, and thank you for attending this panel discussion on giving patients a voice. As said, my name is Justin Birckbichler, and I'm a nearly 3-year testicular cancer survivor. Ever since I was diagnosed back... thank you. Ever since my diagnosis back in October 2016, I've been very passionate about sharing my story openly and honestly on my website, A Ballsy Sense of Tumor. And you guys picked up on that one quick. While cancer is certainly no laughing matter, I have found that a tongue-in-cheek and a positive approach is a great way to crack the nut, if you will, on some of these important discussions like the one we're having today. One of the very first times I met with my oncologist, he said to me, "Justin, we're going to find the treatment that works best for you." And throughout my entire treatment process and now in my survivorship phase of things, I've always felt like my voice has been really valued and appreciated, and I think it's just something that's really, really important discussion to be having. And I think that discussion even needs to start happening earlier in the drug development process, because nobody knows the patient experience like a patient. And the theme of this year's People vs. Cancer Summit is to dive deeper into what it means to live with cancer. And so I'm joined here today by Linda House, the president of the Cancer Support Community. Sorry, I should have memorized that a little bit better. And Dr. Samit Hirawat, who is the Chief Medical Officer of Bristol-Myers Squibb. And I'd also like to take a moment to thank BMS for providing my travel to be here today. So Linda, Samit, thank you very much for joining me.
Sure, thanks for having us.
So we're just going to dive right in with, I'm going to start this first question at Samit. What would you say are the benefits to including the patient voice in the drug development process?
Sure. Thank you, Justin. First of all, I really appreciate your seeing the lighter side of being diagnosed with cancer and making people laugh, even on a serious matter over here. From my perspective, very early on, even in my career, in my training, when we think about a patient, you stop thinking about statistics, first of all. We don't say median survival is this and median progression-free survival is this, because you treat a patient as a patient. And if you think about a patient, then more than the regulatory endpoints of overall survival and progression-free survival, it is more important to treat the patient holistically and think about what is important to them. I'll just share an anecdote and then come back to your question as well. Many years ago, when I saw a patient with anaplastic thyroid carcinoma, we knew what the outcome is. And literature would say that the prognosis is pretty bad, and in those days, survival being around 4 months. But when we talked to the patient and said, what is it that is important to you? Because we know what the outcome is going to look like. It was a frank discussion. And he clearly said, all I need is some time because I need to take care of a few things. And we did everything we possibly could in terms of putting a stent, finding the best combinations of chemotherapy, providing him the best care that we could. He survived about a year. And he was very thankful towards the end that he had that time to take care of the family matters that he needed to. And what that tells us is asking the patient of what is important is very important. And so then when we come back to drug development, to have the efficacious drug development, not the efficacy of the drug, it's important to know what is going to be that important endpoint to measure from a patient perspective. To take that perspective and go to the regulators and talk to them, and even educate them, if need be, to say, why is that particular point important? If we talk about pain, for example, it becomes part of a larger quality of life scale, and is that the right way to measure it? Or should it be a pain scale specifically, let's say in breast cancer, beyond just the prostate cancer that we normally talk about pain scales? So those are the things that become important very early on, from an early stage development, mid stage development, and late stage development, and there could be different points of views. For example, asking, how many blood draws are okay in a phase 1 trial? Because that's a big burden from a visit perspective as well as taking the amount of blood that you do. So those are, I think, critical matters that we need to really ask the patients very early on in drug development process.
I absolutely agree. I felt at one point my oncology office had enough blood to create a second version of Justin, and nobody wants that. Trust me on that one. Linda, question for you here. How can pharma and advocacy work together to ensure that the patient voice is heard?
Sure, and there are a number of ways that we are already working to make sure that the voice is heard. So our organization, in addition to being a service delivery arm, we have a research institute. And the idea of the research institute is to really to be the expert in the cancer patient experience so that we can share with regulators and other decision makers across the stakeholder portfolio what it's like to live with cancer. And an example that I use a lot is we have a validated distress screening tool, and we know through the work that we've done over time that patients who are distressed about disruption to work, family, school life have a 92% probability of developing a clinical diagnosis of depression, which in addition to all that means for the patient in this world where we're still looking at big numbers, it's $8,400 per patient per year more for a patient who has depression, just for the treatment of the depression, not to mention the lost work and all of those other factors. So I use that as an example, especially in the drug development process, because if you're developing a product that would be a daily infusion for a period of time, or if you have to wear a pack and it's a 24-hour infusion for a period of time, how can you think about crafting the science to meet the needs of the patient in that situation? And we could talk about this all day. It's such a fascinating topic.
Right. Definitely a fascinating topic, but we have 3 minutes and 37 seconds left here. So as we kind of bring it to a close, there's a little clock there. I'm just not that good at time. Both of you, and you touched on this a little bit, and so either one of you can jump in, just fight each other for the mic here. What are some examples that you have seen in this, and how can we take that further?
I can start off and certainly will give you 1.5 minutes, I guess,
Okay.
from Justin's perspective. Some of the examples that we've seen and I've utilized in my life is to get in touch with the patients or patient community or advocacy groups, to invite them to give a perspective of what is important, to involve them in the clinical trial design, in terms of thinking what the unmet medical need is, how to incorporate those endpoints within the clinical trial and measure them. Whether should it be done on a paper case report forms or in the electronic format, how to translate those into various languages because we do global clinical trials, how to then utilize that data. It is not necessarily important to have that in the label or not, but it is important to have the education part of it. And so how to communicate that data going out. So those are all important aspects as we think about global drug development, because it's fascinating to me, and we were talking about it earlier, that 85% of the patients who are going to be treated are treated in the community setting. But that's not our outreach during a clinical trial. So how do we incorporate that into our thinking very early on? Because beyond those primary and secondary endpoints, there are other things that need to be measured and then communicated from the clinical trial perspective.
And I'll take the other side of that. So you've already communicated how advocacy works with you, but what we do as advocates is also to help inform policymakers. And so that might be talking to the FDA and saying, hey, why can't we integrate this type of an endpoint? Because guess what? It doesn't just measure what's happening with the tumor that lives inside the human, but it's actually measuring how the human is interacting with the treatment that's being planned for them. So how can we go from what many of you have maybe heard as patient-reported outcomes, which I consider the what, 40% nausea and vomiting or a percentage of alopecia, to the so what, which is what is the impact that these type of patient-reported outcomes are having. And we've had a number of conversations with the FDA, and we're currently working with the team that's looking at the next generation of 21st century cures to actually think about how do we go from patient-reported outcomes to patient experience outcomes and make sure that those are allowed in the label, that regulatory decisions around payments are reflecting those type of data points as well. So we're looking forward to that next evolution for sure.
So as we're wrapping up here, I would like to thank both Linda and Samit for joining us. It's very clear just in this brief discussion that you guys are both very passionate and committed to bringing in the patient voice. And as a former patient, current survivor, I do very much appreciate that. And for everybody out here, I hope our discussion here really helps get the ball rolling, if you will, on a delayed outcome. Stand up all over again. But I hope that helps us have more important discussions throughout the remainder of this summit and beyond, because it needs to be bigger than just us today. It's something that truly does affect us all. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin.